whilst we're getting more people in, let's start with the fact that actually this is a really exciting time for the UK. Aside from the reality show, which was politics, we are 28 days away, 28 days away from the first ever launch from UK sovereign soil. So it's a really interesting time for UK from a space tech perspective in terms of the actual whole ecosystem and what we can now do with this. Because if you remember when we've had this type of launch from the US, they created a lot more awareness. In turn, that creates a better environment for these types of startups and companies to be really going out and doing stuff in the market. So it is a brilliant time for us, like I said, aside from everything else going on for us. And yes, we are counting down because unfortunately, or fortunately, one of our portfolio companies is on the rockets, but he couldn't make it today, and that's Josh from SpaceForge. So yeah, kicking off into the panel with some introductions. Space is one of those things that as a child, you're really fascinated by either becoming an astronaut or dinosaurs, and then the passion's quashed by reality. But clearly it doesn't always kill everyone's reality. So I want to start with some introductions, but I want to make them slightly different in that give a minute or so on your background and also what your company does and why you got into what you're doing. What inspired you? I'll start with yourself, Anthony.
Okay, so I'm Anthony Baker, co-founder of Satellite View. Satellite View is going to launch some thermal satellites with a resolution that we can find where in the world we're wasting energy. So we can look at building levels and say, that building's less efficient than that one. And that translates into other business cases like that factory, that coal furnace is working and this one's not. So we can keep people honest on investments and net zero targets. So my background is 25 years in satellites. I'm sort of the lead guy in the company on space. Everyone else is on the data side. But I've worked around the world in Asia and Middle East most recently, building and scaling companies. My last role, we were making allowing Qatar to have its independent satellites, and we were looking at what else does a small country need. It needs to see over the borders. So we started looking at Earth observation, and then why aren't people using this data? So we're pretty used to having GPS in our pocket, in our phone, although not everyone knows about it. But why aren't we using Earth observation? So we got a bit of weather data, and I started talking to customers and users, and why is it inaccessible and not palatable to every day? Maybe with our application, it can be. So that was some of the inspiration. The other part was, I was reading a report about plastic in our ocean, and it turned out that 80% of plastic in the ocean comes from 10 rivers. And that report took 2 years to figure out that by sampling with ships and things. It's like, why can't we do this from space? And it turns out in infrared, there is a signature. And so maybe one day we'll be able to update those reports a lot quicker.
Cool. Bianca?
So I'm Bianca, CEO and co-founder of SpaceTech. And my entire background has been aerospace engineering. So I am Italian, as you can tell from my accents, but I worked in Germany and the UK, and I spanned across from GPL NASA missions like the InSight Mars mission, where I was a thermal engineer and fluid dynamic engineer. Then I moved on to CubeSat, ESA missions, and then what brought me to the UK was a role as product manager on the telecommunications spacecraft at Airbus Defence and Space. This is where actually I started seeing the problems that brought me to start SpaceTech. So as a product manager, together with my now co-founder James, we started realizing that every innovative material that you wanted to use in a new mission that had a cascading effect on cost savings and especially advantages in terms of technologies. So everything is going to be lighter, more powerful, cheaper, faster. They couldn't actually be applied in space because the paradox is everything that needs to be used in space first needs to fly in space. You have to have the flight heritage. And if not even Airbus Defence and Space could really solve this problem after millions spent and more than 7 years worked on development on ground, who else can actually do this? How are we going to build something that is going to be sustained for the next hundreds of years in space with the same titanium and aluminum alloys that we used for the Apollo mission? So we quit our job and we started SpaceTech 2 years ago to solve this problem. So our mission is literally to enable humanity to thrive beyond Earth, unlocking the power of advanced materials. And all we're doing is to disrupt the status quo of this paradox, this qualification, and do the testing and qualification of all of these materials, not just on ground, directly in space. In every orbit they will be used, so that they can be used also as quality control for materials that are manufactured in space, that are going to be used on the Moon, on Mars, or any other orbits. And so that's my mission, and this is what inspires me every day to strive so that SpaceTech works.
Thank you very much. Jerry?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Julian. So I'm based in Paris. Just actually came in yesterday, and happy to see that there was no strike this weekend, or maybe it was. I kind of get these emails every 2 weeks from another. I feel London is becoming Paris.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm general partner of HCVC, so we're early stage venture capital firm based in Paris and San Francisco, focusing on early stage what we call hard tech companies. So robotics, aerospace, automation. We did 2 nuclear fusion investment this year, also Legro Meet. So to kind of say that our mission is to digitize, automate, and decarbonize the physical economy. We launched in 2015 a community called Hardware Club. Some of you might have heard about the club. Today it's about 700 startups and more than 1,800 founders. And then we launched our first one in 2017. And today we manage 2 funds, across 2 funds, about 100 million euros under management. My background was semiconductor, so kind of old-fashioned, from Taiwan. The past 2 years, it's easier to tell. Now it's easier to tell people I'm from Taiwan and I do semiconductor. People kind of make that mental connection now. Obviously, I missed a lot of things as well, but I was still sitting the headline all the time. I spent 12 years building chips, 4 years as a founder, sold a company in 2008, got hired by Qualcomm and moved to Silicon Valley, worked there for a couple of years, left the industry for good in 2012 to Paris. My personal interest in space, so I led the first and only deal in space in the first fund into a company called Radiant Aerospace, based in Seattle and New York. We invested in 2018, and they just raised 27 million from last year from Fidelity family office. So they're building one stage to space station space shuttle. So today, if you look at like SpaceX with Dragon, it's still like 2 stages. And our belief is that if you want to build this like between the Earth and deep space, you need this ecosystem, which is our orbit, and you need this frequent trip back and forth without all the mess. I don't know, how many of you have watched the live broadcast of Dragon going to ISS? It's very long, right? It started on Saturday and kind of like falling asleep. and the next day you wake up, oh, now we can see ISS now. You're getting excited. It took 2 hours to get to the ISS vision, and then another 1 hour to clear the. It's not going to work. So that's one of the reasons why we raised in region. And we did another deal from Fund 2 in a company called Antares. That was two former VPs of Panellists that was building the Android for satellite. So they allow, if you do that, probably you're building from scratch and based on some legacy systems, they want to build this platform that will allow people to build satellites more, straightforward. Yeah. So
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, I won't go into type 1 background, as you heard from Bianca on the previous panel, but me, I am the general partner for Type 1 Ventures, and as Bianca mentioned, we set up the office in the UK after having invested in a company here and led one of the largest seed rounds for a space tech company in Europe. The opportunity there for this and the what is coming of a much better ecosystem in the UK and European side has actually dragged in more capital from, as we were saying, in the US and further afield. But then I'm going to propose the question to you guys as to, we saw in the 80s there was a big activity around space that then died down for quite some time. But we are seeing, and we're in the midst of that kind of kicking off again. Why do you think now is so important for space? And I'm going to start with you, Bianca. What is it right now that is right for the market, and why space now?
So I think that there's been much more awareness of what actually space does for people on Earth. That's really the first thing. If you think about when everybody asks me now, why do we invest? Why do we do space technology? When I started studying long ago, people were like, why space? You're crazy. There's nothing to do there. And then you will see. And now when everybody's asking me, why do we have satellites and so on? I say, well, do you use Instagram? Everybody's like, yes, we do. Do you use GPS? So this is how we survive. So there is so much benefit coming from space, but at the same time, it's not just about what we're doing here, but it's about, again, everything that can be done in space directly to serve our economy. For instance, a project that now we're working on with a customer is the next space-based solar power plant in space. And that's going to be one of the potential solution for the net zero to 2050. And if we can do that in space and remove the hurdles of the energy issues that we have on Earth, then we've actually solved one of the biggest problems that we have on Earth. So this is really the moment to do that, because in the next couple of decades, besides us living in space, our life on Earth is going to be much, much better.
I think it's interesting. We'll probably have a whole panel on this itself, but what SpaceX has done for the market, for the industry, has genuinely been quite phenomenal in terms of bringing down the cost of launch. So it's now like 30% cheaper, 30 times cheaper than it used to be at $1,500 per kg, and it's predicted to go down on the current trajectory to less than $300 per kg. Does that make business models like yourselves more sustainable? Does that make it more feasible for you guys to do what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I think the billionaires have enabled some of this, whether they do it for their own sport. But one of the knock-ons is that they have created some amazing technology opportunities. So I've paid $50,000 in my career for a kilo. And now actually we're paying 6,000 because he's just put the price. There's even inflation in Elon's world. So until the Starship goes up, where there might be a drop in price, the current price is around 6,000. You can look it up on the internet. You can book his rocket on the internet. So that's how easy it is. Whereas it used to be 50 pages of negotiation. Now it's 2 pages, take it or leave it. So that is refreshing as well, and enables smaller companies to engage with these larger providers with a standardized product, and we fit onto their rocket rather than having the bespoke suit made for you. It fits. And there's other things as well. It's the mega constellations, these thousands of satellites that are being launched and backed by Bezos and I guess OneWeb to a certain extent. So that's UK government backed, and Starlink from Elon and himself. They're ordering components in the thousands. They're now star trackers and all the components we need to build. They're mass producing. And so if you ignore the supply chain issues at the moment, prices will come down. Whereas we're launching 8 satellites. The price for 1 star tracker or 8, it's the same. It makes no odds to the manufacturer. So this mass production and not commoditization, but mass production it benefits everybody, including the startups.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are you seeing that from an investor's perspective at the moment? Because I'm going to dig in deeper into the whole billionaire space race aspect, because have you seen that as a thing that has helped, or has it caused people to shy away from it, thinking it is just a show off or like their own sport kind of thing? What are your thoughts from an investor's side?
For the moment.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you all know the big context. In the past 2 quarters, the investment slowed down dramatically. That's just a public market correction and all that. And in terms of space, I think it's always been this kind of up and down thing. So I'll give you one example. So we invested in Radiant Aerospace in 2018 and really worked very close with the CEO to help them raise the fund. It has been tough. I mean, there was a time when it's easy to raise in space if you have a star CEO or like a really famous person or someone like Kanye West, angel ticket in your company. And there were companies that work on real technologies that don't have this fancy kind of like angel resume that couldn't raise money. Then the SPAC happened. You also saw the news, like all those news going up and going down. So it was kind of this like emotional cycle where sometimes they were being chased by SPAC, investors that want to bring them public, going through SPAC, and obviously that came down to something, and they eventually decided to go for a more normal route and raise a real round. So there's always this capital market up and down, and I think if I'm going to say the timing right now, I would say it was not so different for me compared to last year, the year before. It still depends on the market sentiment on which sector you want to go in. So for example, in terms of remote sensing, there was a lot of money that went into remote sensing because it was obvious, there was an obvious path to revenue, and so people can imagine themselves, what is the go-to market, who's going to buy. And it's not so trivial for some of the other companies, like so there was manufacturing space that we look into very deeply, right, which obviously have its merits, but then there's always the question, what is the market? And we haven't done any investment. Maybe you have done one or two. Different investors have different view on what are the timelines and all that. And so I think so right now the benefit is that now that the market cooled down, and so the past 2 years, I guess people are chasing NFT, crypto, yet another fintech company, right? So what we say is that okay, now people are back onto Earth.
Yes, yeah. Looking to space.
No pun intended. Back to Earth, and now they're coming back to get interesting, potentially real long-term, not just short-term, liquidity kind of crypto investment, which is good. Which means that you're now spending time to really, have
and
a
that
conversation.
comes down to a lot of the stuff what this whole event's about, right? Like people are now finally starting to look at deep tech as an actual R&D, but commercialization. And yes, it's not just a fad. All these meme stocks and everything else that's been going on over the last probably 18 months, 2 years, has probably been a bit of a negative for the overall investment market, because there's no real substance in a lot of that stuff that's happening. Whereas a lot of the types of technologies we've been discussing around this event and within space has some real substance to be able to actually track what the future potential of this market might be. Even if it's a blue ocean strategy, there's a way of being able to quantify what that's going to mean for humanity and in turn for commercialization. From a founder's perspective, not just the kind of recent quarter, but how have you guys seen the UK and European market when you're going out talking to investors, talking to potential LPs and funds? So I'll start with yourself on that.
Yeah, so we've raised Series A. I think we closed the second close was in February of this year, and that's fully funded the first 2 satellites. But our customers want the 8 satellites, and so we're going to have to raise that fund. So we've been watching the market, and in March it just froze. I mean, everyone said, the investors are going, why would I buy now if the market's still falling? I don't want to look silly investing now at this price when it could be half in a few months' time. We think, but the counteract to that, there were still funds being launched, and people had, certainly on the climate side, there's a lot of climate funds. They've been holding their powder, it seems, but that we get a lot of inbounds from large companies. And we're about to launch our Series B in the next few weeks to try and see if we capitalize on that. I think the scrutiny is a lot higher at the moment. So whereas before you had to show a vision and some proof points, it's now proof points. And where's that market going to be? And so it's a lot tougher, but I think it's healthy as well.
I was going to say, that's the right thing, right? Like if you're thinking about the longevity of our market, we should, as investors, be doing a lot more research than probably used to be done in the last several years, because we want to actually show the good companies and show this is actually a tangible, actual viable product or service. So I think that's probably the right trajectory. It's probably helping the businesses like yourselves that have got something there. How about yourself?
So we were funded last year. Yes. So we just started in the biggest crisis we could possibly peak to start a business. And so far we've been bootstrapping. So obviously what I can say though is that we're a very young company, having invested pretty much our co-founder money into the business. What I'm saying is that the VC landscape or the angel landscape, it's very open in a way that they're not shying away from conversations. They want to hear what you're doing. So it's what I'm seeing in now is that yes, it's tough, but it's relationship building. And also it must be said that for some very specific technology like the one that we're doing, or anyway, very deep space tech niche, obviously to a generalist investor, it's something that is not bringing return tomorrow. So you have to bring them with you on a vision that is going to last for the next decades. And that needs building relationship. It needs to go everywhere. It needs to really making sure that you are able to deliver a certain milestones. So this is from an equity point of view. Obviously, it is tough, and it's really hard on the co-founders to really do everything at the same time. While you're writing proposals, you are fundraising, meeting with angel investors, and working on the technology. However, there is a lot of help out there. Even the VCs themselves and the investors, when they understand that you have potential, they guide you to do better. And what they've told us, you have to act like cockroaches during this time. So if you survive as a cockroach during this time, you're going to be successful. So.
And it's a really valid point. As in, maybe not the cockroach analogy, but if we look at all of the cycles previously, some of the best companies have come out of those times. And the real reason for that is, one, because it's the survival of the fittest to a certain extent. You're going to do what you need to do. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing, which is clearly here, you are, then you're not going to go through that journey. So, and I think it's a tough time, but it's probably one that will show out the real good quality technologies that are going to be coming from this side. Over the last, one of the reports I read recently showed there was $24 billion of investment in the space industry, of which in the last 5 to 7 years, of which 80% of that was VC. The difference being in the 80s, it was very much public funded and you didn't get much money at all, probably the other way around on that. However, there is still a part to play for government agencies. And for yourselves as two founders, and I'll come on to yourself in a minute, but for yourselves as two founders, what would you like to see from our agencies and government support for you as a business, or what have you had that's worked well?
Yeah, it's fundamental. So we managed, in our seed round, in the term sheet, it was a condition that we get so much grant funding. So we had to win a grant in order to get the VC to lead. And in the second round, it was a huge part of the pitch that there is this money available, and here's the way we're going to try and win, and we had to put probabilities on it and really drill down where this non-dilutive funding was going to come from. So going forward, it's hugely important, and with austerity on again look like it could be coming in. The governments are going to be very, very careful on where they spend their money. So you need to get inside their heads and pitch things that support government policy and yeah. So we found that on the technology side, that the space agency's been very supportive for us for helping to de-risk some of that. But that's only half the story. The VCs, you are darlings, are concentrating on this market, which nobody quite knows the size of it, but we have to try and find those proof points. So helping us scale that, going beyond the proof of concept and scaling it. If you want us to be a $1 billion revenue company, then we need that support. So we're lobbying now for the government to help us scale the company, certainly around energy efficiency at the moment. So you can subsidize everybody's energy bill, or you can get to the root cause and put some insulation in their lofts, and we can show everyone in the UK which ones are bad and which ones are not. So that seems like a logical thing for the public, for us, and the government.
Well, thank you. What about yourself, Bianca?
So what we've seen is that we've been working and been supported by the UKSA, the European Space Agency, again, on the risk of the technology, on the acceleration. So what I can say is that from an ecosystem perspective, it's really much better than when it was when I even started working. Everybody wants to help each other. And even the UKSA, the government, they are really doing a lot of work to try and listen to the entrepreneurs, to try and listen what do we need to do for them that we haven't done before. The only issue that I see here with respect to what happens in the US is obviously the scale of the money, because it's an order to orders of magnitude less. So if I think about one of my competitors that had 10 millions by NASA to go to the moon, that could never happen to me in the UK. If I think about the DoD and obviously the big projects that are won and awarded by the governments, again, the scale from the MOD or any other European government is not the same. Or if we are going for Innovate UK, 50 grants on an innovation award to scale up your business, if I'm already generating revenue and I need to scale up my business internationally, I'm not going for a proposal for 50K, I'm going for a Series B. So this kind of disconnection with the reality of the problems of the founders are yet to be addressed, but there is willingness to improve. So that's really hopeful.
Brilliant. From an investor's perspective, where, as Francesco said earlier on in his first speech, we've seen the acceleration of deep tech, and that's primarily been driven by the fact that it is private capital coming into this. So there is a role to play, but as an investor, what would you like to see from governments in terms of the support against that private capital?
So I can only speak for Europe, right? Obviously, UK is not part of Europe anymore.
Had to get a dig in there, didn't you?
Everyone has seen. And so I'm going to go on a limb here. So my sort of my experiences with like European Union sort of label kind of space related. Obviously, we have ESA in Europe and we have all those things. My general hope is that they just stay away from what we're doing because there's usually, especially just if you're starting a space company, I'll just be careful because if you're dealing with like European Union or European, there's this like weird, I think the past 3 years with China and Russia, there's this weird, again, we have to own our own, which is true, you have to own your own critical infrastructure, which space is a big part of that. But it's that in a very twisted way, I'm starting to hear some rumors that saying, okay, now if you just rumors.
Be careful what you say.
If you're a European startup and you have like businesses contract with like ESA or you take investment from European whatever, who institutional investors' money, then you cannot, do business with United States. Like kind of weird things that are happening again on the, again, I kind of understand why UK left European Union because weird people. So that's actually the thing. Like you mentioned, like in US, so Radiant signed a lot of contract with obviously with DoD and with also Space Force and a lot of governments, but they didn't sign anything with any of the European thing because it's always come down to the question: your American companies, do you do this or do that? But frankly speaking, I think infrastructure for region or for countries is important, but space is out there, right? Not like Europe owns the space just above Europe. Do this projection like Batman signal. You can
Don't tell Brussels.
And enjoy it in the wrong way because we have to expand this way and enjoy it in the wrong way. Hopefully, okay. I would probably stay away from getting too much involved in that process. That's my suggestion to my portfolio company. And if you're doing the right thing, I think there's a lot of resources out there. I would treat government agencies as clients, but not, I'm not going to count on them to offer helps. Because usually that is very messy.
Yeah.
Once you get involved with them.
And that's a really interesting point. Well, first of all, you painted a very positive picture of Brexit, but we won't go into that. But the point with regards to some of the conversations that are being had with UKSA, for example, is how they become clients. So using not just grant funding, but actually being able to contract companies like yourselves to be able to get some commercial viable outcomes to those rather than just grant funding, which has no real accountability sometimes and can be seen as a bit of a negative sometimes with investors coming in. So I think there's a few things changing from the UK market. I'll give that side, which is one, that's how they're looking at things. And secondly, let's be honest, unfortunately, there is a lot of money that the government agencies have to be able to fund these types of projects, but it's getting that funding right. And I think the UK is coming onto something at the moment, which is being able to co-invest with funds. So you're basically, yes, there's a pot of money, but you're relying on the expertise of the VCs to deploy that money. You're not trying to break that in-house. So it's a way of supporting the mechanism for VCs.
How do you speak the carrot there?
Speak to?
The carrot interest.
Yeah. Well, so no, they have conversations on that side, but maybe we'll catch up as a side on that one. But yeah, moving slightly aside with regards to where the sector's going and something that's coming through, which is space as a service, a new way of talking about SaaS. So space as a service could potentially make things a lot more accessible and also potentially reduce the amount of things that have to go in space itself, because you don't have to have so many different satellites going up. I'm going to come to Jerry, first of all, with anything in your portfolio or what your thoughts are on space as a service coming through.
Sanjeev is being politically correct. When he talked about space as a service, was meaning higher multiple rate variation compared to a one-off revenue, right? But I mean, look, we all know that already the biggest element of the revenue happening in space today is already a service like data services, telecom services, and all that. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the hope that if you provide telecom connection, internet connection from start, then we can liberate China. That's a different topic.
Very political.
I guess for the investors, that's always the big question. So for the investors, if you're not in the service business, don't even come to us. If you're in selling, so that's why we talk to a lot of people selling modules to satellite companies, whatever. It could be very innovative, but for VC, it's just okay. I might like it, but I know everybody else hates it. So we kind of. We come to these kind of events, Sanjeev and I, the big job is to sniff each other out and see what they're doing, and so it's kind of like perfect time, but at the same time, you see very clearly public markets all behave in the same way. And so space as a service is definitely a must for any startup that is doing today, however you frame it, even if you're one-off, just try to frame it as a service. And bottom line is that, I don't think there's any appetite for otherwise in the investment market. And so I think that's something that has to be very clear for all the startups. Yeah.
I guess that kind of follows on from one of the points we made earlier on about it being more than just a research project. Now, a lot of these types of technologies are coming out into becoming more viable projects, which then leads it to become a more commercial opportunity. So, sticking on that same tune, because I know exactly what you guys do. So
So talking about space data, exactly what Jerry said, this is what I wanted to say, is when we are using space data or providing a hardware, as a matter of fact, the hardware is giving us back a service, which is basically what we do. So we provide a small hardware, which is giving us back metadata from space. So as a matter of fact, space is a service already. Mm-hmm. Now, if we remove from the data, let's say the data-driven conversation about the service, and we talk about processes in space, then it's happening as well, like manufacturing in space, testing in space, melting junk from space, recycling it and reusing it in space. That's a new, completely new, different emerging market, which is a service that can offload, obviously, Earth, besides the CO2 emissions that we're not going to have, but offloading Earth from a bottleneck of supply chain services, infrastructures that maybe are not even needed anymore. We just need to do everything in space. And we don't have to go back and forth. We don't have to manufacture there, coming back, testing here, then going back again. We just do everything there. And the data that is coming from there is going to create digital twins on Earth and all this cascading event of stuff. So yes, data, but also the entire infrastructure is going to be a service.
Yeah, I think at the moment data's been probably the biggest part of it. So satellites, and in particular with data, is 70% of the space market. But we are seeing a clear shift away from just that. And that links into what both of you have said in other sectors coming through. So yes, it might be a satellite up there, but it's actually doing a lot more testing or manufacturing or recycling, as you said. So any other comments that you want to add on to that side as well?
Yeah, I think clearly you need, from our side, data as a service is important. I would challenge a little bit on your assumption I think you were alluding to aggregation, where some companies say, here's a platform, you can plug in your widget, whether it's a processing or a comms or a sensor. I think that's going to happen anyway. And it's economies of scale help. So yeah, there is a niche there, especially if you don't need a dedicated platform. And does that reduce space junk? No, I think that enables people who know nothing about space to put their payload into space and concentrate on the process and not on the space hardware. I think the only thing that's going to fix space junk is regulation, because I don't think the industry is responsible. We can see that everyone's launching things everywhere, and it's not my problem.
And that's going to be one of the many risks, but a key risk is going to be the regulation side of things, and also geopolitical, because that in itself could change the industry entirely as to what it looks like. And there's an argument that actually too much regulation could cause issues and actually stump some of the things that we want to do. So we won't go into that because I'm conscious of time. So I'm going to go to the final question that I always ask on any panel, and that is a book recommendation and why. I'm going to start with you, Jerry.
Oh, book?
Yes.
I don't read books. No, I don't have any space-related
Doesn't have to be space-related, but
yes, but just a very good book among all the books I read about entrepreneurship was It Will Never Work by Mark Goldberg. Was the original founder of Netflix. People today only know Reed Hastings, but actually he was the one who came up with the idea and tested. So I think that book was really, really good because it was talking about the early days of iteration and how they came up with the idea of eventually how to do experiment, how do you mail VCD back then. It's not even DVD back then, VCD printers. I think that sort of reminded me of my days as an entrepreneur, and I always recommend that book to everyone because even coming back to what Elon did with SpaceX, right? It's now iteration in early on, and which is a different way from doing the budget of $1 billion and at NASA, right? So if you search for the book, I think you'll enjoy it.
Brilliant. Bianca?
So I will not say that my favorite book is on hypersonic aerodynamics because nobody's going to read it. But to stick with space and on a more emotional note, I would say The Overview Effect by Frank White. So it's a compendium of experiences and words or memoirs by astronauts who have gone into space, and they are trying to tell in their own words what they've experienced. Some of them, they call it spiritual. Some of them, they call it the darkest thing they've ever seen. Some of them, they were terrified. It's just extremely beautiful to see from a human perspective what the shift it's created space to see Earth from there. So I would recommend that to anybody.
Brilliant. Anthony?
I have 3 books. So I was talking about the 80s. I was inspired by Carl Sagan, the pale blue dot, and so that's really sort of the first person that popularized the space, I would say. Mm-hmm. As a startup, it's the book Hard Things About Hard Things by Horowitz. So that's a good read for anyone who's sitting in our seats. And but I think maybe popular literature, but most recently Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. Mm. If you're if you believe that technology is going to get us out of this mess, he's got it's a lot of numbers, but he tries to make that case. And I think it's a very logical way of doing things.
Brilliant. Mine would be the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Absolutely scares you, so don't read it at night because it shows you what life could be if technology is not managed in the right way, but it also shows you what the utopian view could be as well. So that takes into consideration a lot of the kinds of things that we're talking about at the Frontier event as a whole. Brilliant. I'm conscious we've thrown a lot of information, but we've kind of touched on top levels of stuff, so hopefully we can carry on this conversation at 3 o'clock as well when we're having drinks. Just a quick one. If you could go to space, just a quick hands up on how many people here would go to space. Impressive.
Including coming back or?
I didn't specify. Brilliant. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for your